Hello, everyone, and welcome to part two of A Tough Ram and a Unicorn Goat. It's Pastor Steve here. Hopefully you've already watched part one of this video. And when I recorded part one, I had fully intended to do it all in one video. But two things happened. Number one, I realized it was going to be longer, and I try to keep these at about 15, 16 minutes. And secondly, I just felt like the Lord wanted me to wait, and now I know why. And when we finish this up this morning, I think you'll know why as well. I was waiting for this second part of this video. So you remember we're talking about Daniel chapter 8. And in Daniel chapter 8, we have this two-horned ram, one horn bigger than the other. And then he goes out in three different directions making war. Nothing can stop him. And no one can stand before him, it says. And then all of a sudden we have this unicorn goat coming from the west, his paws never touching the ground, and he charges and he tramples the ram and he conquers it. And then his one horn breaks, and out of that one horn we have four horns, and out of one of the four we have one that becomes blasphemous and so forth. And then the angel Gabriel comes and he gives Daniel an interpretation. And if you'll remember, he told him that the two-horned ram is Medo-Persia. He told him the one-horned goat is Greece, and he says the ram with one horn, or at least the traditional interpretation of this prophecy, the ram with one horn is Alexander the Great. When the horn breaks, four come up in its place, and that happened because Alexander died in June of 323 with no heirs. His kingdom was divided between his four generals, basically. And the little horn is seen as Antiochus Epiphanes, who came out of one of those four horns, the one that became known as Syria and that area of the world, or the one that ruled that part of the world. And Antiochus Epiphanes persecuted the Jews, and he profaned the temple for a number of years, between 171 164, so about 7 years there, BC. And so he was the blasphemous one. But there's some problems. And the problems for me with that interpretation are clear. First of all, in verse 17, the angel says, he said to me, "Understand, O Son of Man, the vision is for the time of the end." Well, Alexander was not the time of the end. In verse 19, he says, "Behold, I will make known to you what shall be at the latter end of the indignation, for it refers to the appointed time of the end." He's repeated it. That's the second time. And finally, in verse 26, he says, "The vision of the evenings and the mornings that has been told is true, but seal up the vision, for it refers to many days from now." Three times he's told him this is for a long time from now, and he tells him to seal it up. I explained last time that sealing it up doesn't mean he didn't print it. He did, obviously, or write it down because we have it. But the meaning of it has been sealed up spiritually from us. So I believe that something is still to happen. In many prophecies, we have a near fulfilling and we have a final or a far fulfilling. While Alexander the Great may have been a near fulfilling, I don't believe he is the far or final filling. In fact, if you look at Alexander the Great, it's not exactly a fit. And here's why. We talked about the four generals taking over when Alexander died, his kingdom being split into four. Actually, the kingdom was split into five. There were four kingdoms throughout the empire, and then the home area of Greece was ruled by another. There really were five and not four. So we're stretching a little bit, even though the four were the major ones. It really wasn't an exact fulfillment. So if this is for the time of the end, we need to understand that, because that tells us that something is coming sooner or later here, that Iran is going to do this, modern day Iran, the Medes and the Persians. So let's look at this in a modern sense. You say, well, Gabriel told him that the two horns were the Medes and the Persians. That fits. Gabriel told him. We can't deny that. But remember in prophecy, when the angels appeared and explained it, or when a prophet wrote, he wrote in terms that he understood in his day, using names, using place names, and so forth that he understood, not necessarily what we would understand it as today. So I want you to look at something here. In 1979, Iran went through what was called the Islamic Revolution. The Shah of Iran was kicked out. Ayatollah Khomeini came in. He was set up as the supreme ruler of Iran, and it became an Islamic nation, the first one since since back in 1923, when the caliphate was just done away with. Excuse me. And so the Ayatollah comes in and he sets him up as the supreme authority. Yes, they elect some officials, they elect a president, they elect parliament, but quite honestly, their constitution is set up saying the Ayatollah has the ultimate authority and makes the final decisions. All of the rest is just done to pacify other people. What the Ayatollah then did was, as the military was formed, he set up a group we call it, a lot of times you'll see it as the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Force. A lot of times you'll just hear it called the Revolutionary Guard, sometimes the Republican Guard, but mainly the Revolutionary Guard. And the purpose of this guard, this section of the military, was to protect the Islamic Revolution, to make sure that nothing outside came in and hindered this Islamic Revolution that's going along. They also protect the Ayatollah. But there was another aspect of this that they are to expand the Islamic Revolution. And that's why you'll hear of this Islamic Revolutionary Guard. They're involved in Syria. They're involved in Hezbollah in Beirut or Lebanon. They're involved down in Yemen in that civil war that's been going on some time. So they are there to propagate the Islamic Revolution. Now, they have become extremely powerful. Let me show you something here. Let's look at a couple of articles that I pulled up. Well, first of all, here's Wikipedia. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard, they were put in place to protect the Ayatollah by order of the Ayatollah Khomeini. And they're to do, as I said earlier, to protect the country's Islamic Republic system. They've become, in many ways, an internal police force. They have much power. And the struggle now, it seems, for many is they've become a monster, as this article talks about. They've become a terror group in and of themselves. These are some tough guys, well supplied, well funded, and now there's this whole debate among international people of who holds the ultimate power there. So when we go back to the two horns, it's quite obvious that the two horns in modern terms would be the Ayatollah, and he came up first. Remember, the second horn has come up and is larger. That's the IRGC. Okay, the IRGC probably now has more power than the Ayatollah if it were to come to push, to push and shove on that. So we now have these two horns in modern terms, ruling the nation of Iran, the Medes and Persians, and we were talking about Elam, and this is all part of modern day Iran. All right, here's a modern day map of Iran. You remember that Elam is in this area just west of the Zagros Mountains, which run here, and it's a plain, it's a flat plain. And quite honestly, there'd be no better place for Iran. If they want to send out an invading force, they would gather their troops in the area that was ancient day Elam, because it's a plain. If they gather them anywhere else, then they're going to have to cross the mountains, cross through mountain passes to get to these different areas. Remember, they're going to come out and go west, they're going to go north, and they're going to go south. All right? I believe this is in the early stages as we speak. to be realistic, Iraq has already gone out to the west. Iran has gone out to the west. They are in Iraq. They have been since the invasion, and more so after we pulled troops. They are in Syria over here. They are down in Beirut, which is way over here on the coast, scattered there with Hezbollah. They are down here in Yemen, in that civil war that's going on down here. Now, to my knowledge, they haven't done much north, but they have threatened Armenia. They would love to take Armenia. They would love to take part of this eastern Turkey, and so forth. So they could very easily break out north. But I believe that even though they're in these areas, this is not the main push. I believe there's coming a day when modern day Iran, the two horns, the Ayatollah and the IRGC, are going to mass their troops, and they're going to do a massive push in these directions. You say, why would they do that? Well, Iran would love to be the ruler. They want to be the ruler of Islam so bad. And their one goal is to destroy the great Satan, which is the U.S., and the little Satan, which is Israel over here. They say it openly all the time. That's what they want to do. And they were pushing for nuclear weapons and so forth to do just that. All right. Now, can you imagine what would happen if Iran were to bust out south into Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, the United Arab Emirates, Oman? They're already in Yemen. They could actually do a twofold push there. They could actually take over the religious sites of Medina and Mecca. But can you imagine what would happen if they went into this area? 1/4 of the world's oil that we get comes from here, and it's much of the world's oil supply. What would happen if they were to set off a couple of nuclear bombs in this area and destroy these oil fields and make them where people couldn't go in them because of radiation? The world's economy would take a nosedive with all that oil gone, and everybody else would be scrambling to get what oil was left. Oil prices would go, no telling how many, $200, $300, $400 a barrel are some of the estimates I've heard if that were to happen. And that would mean fuel prices would be $20, $25 a gallon for us. You can see what it would do to the economy of the world. Now, so that's the two horns. That's the Iran. Modern day Iran, pushing out in all these directions. All right, let's look now to the goat from the west. Verse 21 identifies the goat as the king of Greece. But remember, the Hebrew word translated Greece is Yavan or Javan. Yavan was actually mentioned in Genesis chapter 10 in the list of nations there. And when you look at maps of the ancient world and where these Genesis 10 nations were, almost all of them will show Javan or Yavan, excuse me, look, that's not Greece. That is Western Anatolia or Asia Minor or Turkey. Yes, they're part of Greece, but they were also here. And remember, we're talking about the way things were in the day of Daniel. So when he referred to Yavan, when the angel told him Yavan, he would have immediately thought of this area, this whole area. So it includes Turkey, all right? It doesn't necessarily, even though this name was ultimately the name for Greece later on, in their mind, it would have been Yavan, not Greece, and it would have been this whole area, okay? So you got to keep that in mind. All right, so now we're back to here. What happens? You got the three directions that Iran is pushed out, and now from the west or from Turkey comes this big army, this goat with one horn that crashes in to the ram with two horns and tramples him. Turkey steps in and stops Iran in this battle. We don't know how long it's going to take, but they finally step in and do something. All right? So what happens then, after they step in and they stop Iran, something happens in Turkey. Not sure what, but something happens in Turkey, and the horn breaks and the four come up. All right? And out of the four, the little horn arises. Now, I want you to think about that a minute. let's look at a couple of scriptures that I want you to be familiar with. The first one is here in Daniel chapter 7. In Daniel chapter 7, which is the chapter before, Daniel has his famous vision of the four beasts. And the fourth beast comes up, and he says in verse 7 here actually, the fourth beast is dreadful, terrible, exceedingly strong, huge iron teeth, devouring, breaking in pieces, trampling the residue with its feet. I believe that is Islam, and I do not believe it was Rome, and that's an object for another day maybe, or subject for another day. But I believe that was Islam and not Rome. But anyway, in verse 8, he says, I was considering the horns on this beast, and there was another horn, a little one, coming up from among them, before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the... Wait a minute. 3 of the first horns. That's a total of 4. Or excuse me, that's 3 horns were plucked out, and then this one horn takes over, okay? And he is speaking pompous words. He's blasphemous. Let's go look at another place here. Let's look at Revelation chapter 17. This is a sort of a riddle here. You need to read this whole chapter. But in verse 12 it says, the 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings who receive no kingdom as yet, but they receive authority for 1 hour as kings with the beast. They are of one mind, and they will give their power and authority to the beast. So we keep hearing of these horns and these different kingdoms. Something is going to happen after Turkey puts Iran in their place, and Turkey's going to break up, and I believe it's going to all be controlled by the Antichrist. We know that's what the little horn is, okay? So this Antichrist is going to arise, and he's going to take over some of these nations. There's going to be a shake-up in the Middle East of sorts. Turkey may even come from the West as a coalition of governments, but likely just Turkey in the beginning. And it may be the other governments then that come against Turkey because they don't want Turkey ruling over them. So, not sure how that's going to play out, but we could see how it could very easily happen. All right? So the little horn is the Antichrist. Now, I want to show you one more thing. I told you in the beginning, I was waiting to give you this prophecy because I felt like the Lord wanted me to. And I want you to look at something here that has just happened. This is an article from The Guardian. Iran missile test may breach UN resolution. France and UK warn. The date on this, December 3rd, Monday. Okay? They are testing missiles again, which breaches the resolution, the Iran deal, as Obama called it, and Trump has already taken us out of it. And so they are still testing missiles. I believe they're still working with their nuclear if they don't already have it. I kind of believe they already have it in some form. It's all a ploy to buy time for them until the right time, and when the right time comes, they're going to go. If they go out in all these directions, you remember Daniel said nobody could stop them, nobody could stand in their way. If they have nuclear capabilities, then no one is going to try to stop them because they know these people will use them. They would have no qualms with killing tens of thousands of innocent people to further their struggle. Now remember also, Iran is Shiite. The rest of the Middle East, for the most part, is Sunni. They hate each other, okay, to a large degree. They don't agree with each other. They both look at each other as infidels for failing to hold up true Islam and so forth. So they both have their ideas. So with all that said, here's the bottom line. Watch Iran. I believe Daniel 8 is still to come, and I believe what's going to happen at the end of all this in Daniel 8 is that we're going to see the Antichrist unveiled. And I also believe that it's very possible that what happens during Daniel 8 could play a major role in the U.S., Europe, many of the economies of the world falling apart. And if the economies fall apart, we lose power. Folks, don't be fooled by these people that tell you we're going to be taken out of here in the rapture before everything hits the fan. Even if you believe in a pre-tribulation rapture, that's fine. But you need to understand that even if you go before the 7-year rapture, there are a lot of things that could happen and likely will happen leading us up to that 7-year period. And so there could be some tough times ahead, and I want you to be prepared for those. So Daniel 8, that's my view on it. I believe there's more to come. And thank you for listening, and I'll be putting out more videos soon. God bless and have a great day.